Matrox's Millenium series is often famed for its 90s greatness and then the huge downfall towards the end, but very few people know that the Millenium series actually got rebooted and was so good that this very well might have saved Matrox. Now this right here are two packages that I've had for a couple of months now, purely because this video has taken a long time to put together. But today I have managed to get a hold of both the Matrox Millenium P650 and P750, two legendary cards that have long since been forgotten to time, with very little known about them. In fact, on YouTube right now, if you search these cards, there are just two AI-generated videos containing complete nonsense. But still, with very little known about them, the main reason I'm telling any of you this, well, we've got to find out what they are. And one of them actually got sent in a box for an electronic massage gun. I mean, it did protect the card in shipping, I just found that a really odd way of sending a graphics card. But anyway, before we get into the story, I did manage to get one of these more or less brand new in box. So what do you actually get with your brand new Matrox Millenium graphics card from 2003? So what do you actually get when you buy a Matrox Millenium card, which isn't something that seems to be very well known out there, at least definitely not on the P750, but fortunately for us, we have the P650 pretty much brand new in box. So when we find out what you actually got from Matrox when you bought a Matrox Millenium. First things first, move this. Next of all, let's get it open and find out what's inside. Rather nice by 2003 standards, at least. It's a bit torn up, but then again, this thing is old. How do I? Well, there's the right way around. Build quality is insane. Maybe that's why it's been ripped. Oh, that tab comes out. Looks like someone else got caught out by that. And then inside we've got all of our various Matrox adapters, which makes my life a lot easier. And we have, still in the original foam. Does this unfold? No. Does it? Pulls out. That'd be our other graphics card, the little P650, which goes with its big brother, the P750, and of course the Parhelia at the top. What else do we have inside though? Anything else? We have a driver CD, we'll use that, and some notes on the card. And is there anything else? There's another bit of paperwork inside. Is this the release notes in Chinese? Printed in China, yes. And that's everything. So that was what you get inside, which for an early graphics card, that's really nice. I mean, the Nvidia cards of this era aren't this generous. But, on with the video. So, one of the main issues I've ran into with the Matrox Millenium series, at least in its rebooted form with the P650 and P750, is that most history on them has been lost to time. I mean, they were a very successful card. They made Matrox what they are today in the specialist market, and they were the initial turnaway from gaming graphics cards into the prosumer market using that gaming technology. They reviewed well, they sold incredibly well, they were reasonably priced. I mean, some of these were incredibly good value for what you got back in the day, but there's no history on them. So I've done as much digging as possible to find out what is a Matrox P750 and P650? Were they any good? What did reviewers think? And how did they come to exist? So as I've said, the actual history of these cards has very much been lost to time. I mean, most people I've spoken to didn't actually realise there was a reboot of the Millenium series, which actually happened after the Millennium. But still, after enough deep digging, I've managed to piece together the history on these cards. And this is how it goes. Rumours of a new Matrox graphics card after the launch of the great yet not so successful Parhelia started just after the card launched in late 2002, with interest on the company's next possible graphics cards peaking in early 2003. The thing is with the Parhelia is that it had features years beyond its time. I mean, we've covered it in a video and I was genuinely amazed by what you got with that graphics card. All it needed was more power or more releases. There was only one card on the market for the gaming segment from Matrox, and as it stands, they had a flagship, but that's all they really had going for them. And over on the forums, people were interested. What was coming next? with Matrox themselves chiming in and prodding some fun at ATI and Nvidia, while also saying there was something new on the way, but they couldn't say much about it, till eventually in mid-2003, more information was given out and new cards released. Despite no evidence of a concrete release date, May 10th seems to be the most common release date for these cards direct from Matrox, with retailers receiving them the weeks after this and review samples going out not too long before this, so May 10th, 2003 seems to be when these cards came out. And there were two new cards bearing the Matrox Millenium name, which for those of you that used the G450, the G400, the G550, virtually any of their 90s cards that were very well received, you'll recognise the Millenium name. The only resemblance they have to the Parhelia is the P in front of their names, namely the P750 and the P650, but they carried on with that numerical naming scheme that Matrox had just moved away from. And they were both similar cards based on the latest architecture, the Parhelia, but this time would appear to be targeting the mid-range segments and below, retaining all the features of the Parhelia, but a lower price point and some cut-down specifications. Reviews of the time are tricky to find online, given that some people have sold the websites before they were archived, other people have taken them down for being hacked, and it's just a bit tricky to find stuff on this card, but those that can be found tend to praise the card to no end. But it did signal a change in the times. Although the Parhelia was an out-and-out gaming card, it found favour with those that mostly needed stability, performance, and quality output in all tasks. So keeping in line with that formula, these new Millenium cards did the same thing, with one reviewer in particular saying they were for, and I love this, the gamer with a job. However, times were changing. Even in the professional scene, there was now competition with Nvidia with the Quadro series, and ATI's Fire Pro cards, well, they were hot on the scene as well. But they lacked something: the accessibility or support or warranty of the Matrox series, with some reviewers noticing that certain versions of Nvidia's Enforce chipsets broke compatibility with Matrox cards, but only in later revisions and updates, even going as far as to say it wasn't Matrox people should be pointing the finger at. And who can imagine that? Nvidia, they're the friendliest company in the world. I have never known them to make their products worse in order to harm the competition. That would never happen. They definitely haven't done that. Yeah, that's not like Nvidia. Still, despite everything, the tampering, the competition, the fact the market was changing, it seems that the P650 and P750 Millenium cards were very popular. It's hard to find any gaming benchmarks from the time that aren't on websites that are completely broken and the graphs that they used simply don't work, but for those that did write about them, they praised the fact that these are ideal for use in video editing, media work, anything like that, completely destroying the competition while still managing to run most games. So they sold. And they sold well, and likely they are the point that made Matrox pivot entirely away from the gaming market, with these cards marking the point that the prosumer market was the one for Matrox, bringing us to where we are today. We know the cards did well, I mean the company survived, but just what are they, and how are we going to find out? How do we know if these cards are so good that they saved the company? And what are the Matrox Millenium Reboot cards? I mean, they're based on a gaming card, but they weren't sold to people for games. People did use them. So what's going on here? Specifications-wise, both the P650 and P750 Millenium cards find themselves being the exact same card, with just 30 MHz clock differences between them. That's really all there is to them. They find themselves being based on the new at the time Parhelia LX architecture, which was, just from what I can see, a normal Parhelia chip cut down in half, just exactly in half, with 2 pixel shaders, 2 vertex shaders, 8 TMUs, 2 ROPs, and either 64 or 128 MB of DDR-based VRAM. Both of these using a very respectable 128-bit memory bus, which is, once again, exactly half of what it is from a full Parhelia. So specifications-wise, when they say cut down Parhelia, they very literally just mean cut in half in every sense of the word, even down to pricing, with these cards retailing for around £90ish back in the day, or around £15 today, making them a bargain on release,
and for those looking for a retro gaming card, a complete bargain today. And remember, with these cards, it's not all about the specs that matter, as that architecture, it has something special in terms of features, as we will quite soon come to see. However, it was very unfortunate that the seller of one of my cards, the P750, had been a little bit dishonest in their listing, as upon my initial first use, well, the easiest way for me to explain this is I'll just let you watch what happened.
Where's my display output? Is it plugged into the right socket? I'm hoping that is just going to work. Did it just turn on and work? Yes, it's just turned on and worked. This is the thing. This is the thing. Every retro graphics card in the world has a problem. Until you use a Matrox graphics card, you plug it in and it just works. It has automatically installed drivers on 20-year-old computer by just being plugged in. Unheard of. Absolutely unheard of. I love that. Yep, P750. Oh Lord, that. I've got the funkiest screen I've ever seen. I've done this though. This is my doing. Properties, settings. I want to somehow blindly navigate back to 800 by 600 and apply. No, assuming that I need actual graphics drivers and the ones from Windows XP don't work very well because this is hideous. Let's restart.
And I tried everything. I thought maybe, given that Nvidia had been known to do some funky messing about with drivers and things like that, I thought maybe the remnants of having Nvidia drivers on the system could be causing issues. But nope, I went through and even manually deleted every INF file related to anything that wasn't Matrox. And nothing. I tried multiple sets of drivers, and nothing. And it was the strangest thing. See, we could get a 640 by 480 image fine. We could even install drivers and have the card display fine in this mode. But the moment we went over this, the output went crazy, and it wasn't artifacting like I've ever personally seen before, but it persisted in the BIOS, in the load screen for Windows. No matter what we would do, the card just wouldn't work normally. I tried to fresh install the Windows XP, no luck. I tried to fresh install the Windows Vista, and it didn't work. I even went to the extent of finding another AGP system, as I thought maybe the SAS chipset on this one was causing issues. But no, even on a rock-solid Dell Dimension server system, which was found in a bin, but that's besides the point, it wouldn't display anything over 640 by 480. I even tried baking the card 5 minutes at 200 degrees, and it was the same. So all I can assume is that this is some sort of fallback mode for dying cards. It seems a very Matrox thing to do and very clever, as it means that if your card has a dying GPU core, like we can see here, this is clearly not an OK graphics card, it can hardly make a picture. But you can load up in a low resolution mode, save any files you might need, and get your system ready to replace the graphics card. Unfortunately though, it does mean our graphics card is dead. Still, we had another one, which was borderline brand new, so we can continue the video with that. How nice for us. Anyways, after an entire day more or less spent trying to figure out why the card wouldn't work, before eventually accepting that yes, the GPU core had unfortunately moved on to the next life, I dug out a newer PCIe-based system for some testing. For those of you with a keen eye, you'll recognise it as the cheap Novatech gaming PC we grabbed a little while back, which is based on LGA 775. But anyways, this Millenium card does have a PCIe slot. And with the P650 now working under Vista and Windows XP, the idea was that given the P650 would go on to be one of the longest living versions of the Matrox Parhelia, and by extent the Millenium cards, we would test it under Vista and test the P750 under XP, but unfortunately we can't do that. Anyway, I can already let you know there's going to be some graphs later, and there is no performance hit under Vista. I know it still rings true for a lot of people, there is no performance difference. It runs great, so the majority of footage you'll be seeing is from Vista, purely because I'd already got it set up and ready to go with this card, but don't worry, we do test XP as well. Now, the general drivers for these cards are the standard Matrox affair. They're very solid, very stable, and packed full of options that you would never dream of seeing on what is now a 21-year-old graphics card. They have dedicated support for multi-monitor and color grading and all those bits, and the install process is as simple as whack in a CD, click next until you're done, and it's lovely to have a little bit of simplicity after yesterday's fiasco. But still, we've got everything set up now. We had dual monitors working for later on, and all that was really left to do was to throw this card into the world of gaming before we touch on the productivity side. Now, these cards weren't exclusively sold to the gaming market. However, they were based on their flagship gaming GPU, and shops like Novatech did actually sell them for gaming purposes as well. And I'm just going to be honest here, Matrox were the ones to leave all their gaming optimizations in the drivers. That wasn't me, so we're going to test gaming. So why don't we find out what that means in the benchmarks. Starting things off, we have GTA Vice City running in 640 by 480 with all of the Matrox enhancements turned on, which means 16 times FAA, which is their own form of anti-aliasing, which has no performance hit from my testing, more on that later, and their own form of texture filtering also enabled. Now, I have never seen 640 by 480 look this good. The level of clarity on show here, even on an LCD screen over an analog connection, it's ridiculously good. Performance was about on par with the consoles of the era despite looking a lot nicer, and we saw anywhere from the mid-20s through to 30 FPS, which is about standard for a lot of entry-level cards from this era. But remember, your average person with one of these cards, even the weaker one here, was using it for work. So being able to load up the latest GTA game and then play it with it looking this good, well, that's astonishing. And once again, this is Vice City. This game doesn't usually look this nice. At least I don't think it does. Absolute insanity already. Now, the next couple of benchmarks I actually tested before I realised that enhancements didn't have any performance hit, or that they were available in the drivers. But still, Command & Conquer Generals here looking very crisp in 800 by 600 with low and medium settings, and we were at our frame cap of 30 FPS and 20 FPS during cutscenes. Yes, there could be some drops in places, but we did in fact have Generals running perfectly smoothly, which was lovely, looking, it looked brilliant. It's not ideal compared to gaming cards of the era where you can max this game out, but up against your average Quadro or Fire Pro card, definitely not bad. And for a retro card today, which is also a context we need to be looking at these in, you can grab these for next to nothing and have Generals look this good, which is even more of a reason to go and find one. Morrowind here, and it's running without enhancements, mostly because, once again, I didn't know they didn't have a performance hit in this time, but still, it looked rather sharp in 800 by 600, achieving around 40 to 50 FPS a lot of the time, occasionally hitting upwards of 60 FPS in smaller towns and locations. Then again, when in bigger cities, there was the usual performance hit around to 30 FPS a lot of the time, but that's to be expected. We were able to keep a good chunk of the view distance turned up, so the game wasn't shrouded in fog, which is very nice, and it looked good. I can imagine with the enhancements turned on, it could even look a whole lot nicer, or at least nicer for Morrowind. This game can look pretty at times, but generally doesn't. Now this one is a tricky one to run, given that this card can have issues on certain cards from the era. And with Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic running here with medium settings in a nice 800 by 600 resolution, it looked better than the Xbox port, but ran about the same, with the frame rate hitting upwards of 60 FPS when nothing much was happening, and dropping to the teens when explosions were going on, as it can be a rather intense game to run, and came out years after this Millennium card was even conceived. So overall a decent experience, and one that looked sharp too. So Knights of the Old Republic, very playable on the P650. Splinter Cell here, also running particularly well, albeit in a lower resolution. We did manage a mixture of low, medium and high settings, which meant that the game could look quite nice in places. We generally saw 30 to 40 FPS, which isn't by any means bad in a game this intensive. And things were sharp and crisp as expected at this point, and it would have been nice to go higher on the resolution, but you have to sacrifice a lot of the graphical options to do so. But still, with a resolution like this looking this good, and some decently okay settings, it wasn't a problem on the card. Still, it wasn't all positives. One game in particular had a very funny bug that I've never seen before, and I can't find anything online about this. I was looking into solutions for this. After restarting the game, trying new drivers, everything, I realised that our HUD was drawing over the game, leaving this weird outline, especially when you threw a grenade, because you just done up with this handprint in the left-hand side with the world visible through it. It's odd. I don't know if there's any fixes for this ridiculous bug, but still, if you wanted to play Halo, maybe don't go for the Matrox graphics card, unless you know about this bug and how to fix it, because I couldn't figure out how to make it work. From here on out though, all benchmarks were done with the Matrox enhancements turned on, as I was a bit stupid at the beginning by not enabling them across the board, as I was going to go back and retest them, before realising they literally have no performance hit, and the visuals they bring with them, it's insanity, it's brilliant. As next we have Half-Life 2 running with low settings, yet it looks like this, which is what the feature set on these cards are all about. This is genuinely the best I've ever seen the game look on low settings and with a low resolution, which really speaks volumes about how much the Parhelia line was so technically advanced. And these Millenium cards, well, they carry on that same gaming enhancements, and even at such a low resolution, which is kind of what you need on these cut down cards, it looks great. What's more spectacular is that for people wanting a retro card, you can get these for nothing and enjoy games in lower resolutions with beautiful clarity. The best way to describe my experience so far is imagine original Xbox visuals with extra detail and precision outputs. So you got console-like performance out of your card that was in your work machine. You know, you go into work and use this card, yet you had the equivalent of the most powerful console in there. Now I know PCs were much superior in terms of resolution and things like that quickly after the original Xbox came out, but still, this is impressive. I mean, look at it. It looks brilliant. Older titles like Half-Life 1 also ran incredibly well, with a nice 1024x768 resolution, utilising either OpenGL or DirectX, and you would see the same brilliant performance with all the enhancements being turned on. And genuinely, this is some of the best footage I have seen of Half-Life 1's intro, and this is what made me realise how impressive it was, as when you ran the game with or without enhancements, the difference was less than 1 FPS. There's no difference. And the same extended over to the majority of games tested. The level of detail on distant textures really made the game pop in a way that I haven't even seen on modern cards. Yes, there are probably ways to force effects like this, but given the age of the hardware that this is from, it's brilliant. Over for Unreal Gold, well, it was a similar case. I personally preferred how it looked in 640x480, but for the sake of the benchmarks where we are trying to get the optimum performance, we did whack things up to high settings in 1024x768, where we saw anything from 50 to 90 FPS, with it usually hovering at around a midpoint between these. Effects like transparency could bring you closer to the 50 FPS mark, but generally ran alright, and overall, it was another success. But really, any card from 2002 and 2003 should be able to run Unreal. It just looks pretty here, which is nice. Mount & Blade Warband released in 2010, which is 7 years after this card came out, and we did have to turn down a lot of things to low in 800x600 to maintain any degree of playability. And it looked hideous. I mean, don't get me wrong, this game can look hideous, but it was very clear. You just could see how ugly it was in precision clarity, is the best way to see it. It genuinely looks awful, which is, you know, Warband at lower settings just looks like this, and it was just about tolerable. But for such a new game, I suppose you could say it ran alright on a card that was never even designed to handle this. The early to mid game could run a lot nicer, and maybe you could increase some of the settings, but yeah, Warband runs, just don't expect it to look good. It'll look crisp, not good. This one was probably a bit optimistic as well, but given these cards haven't been tested on anything really, I wanted to throw as many benchmarks as I could up against it. And with Fable the Lost Chapters running with low settings in 480p, it looked very clear, and the frame times were brilliant, which isn't something I've spoken much on because generally the frame times on this card are fantastic, even if the average is quite low. I mean, yes, this is technically unplayable with it running at mostly 20 FPS a lot of the time, but I was able to start speedrunning the game for no apparent reason, and it was very responsive. I got a bit carried away and ended up playing through quite a bit of it. So yes, you can play the game, it's just not an ideal way to do it. And it's a bit funny that with the lowest settings, the water turns into a gloopy puddle of blue soup. So, interesting there. Finally, we rounded off with Unreal Tournament 2003. I guess because that was all the rage back when this card finally found its way into systems around the world, and I can only imagine how many hours of work were lost to people playing this on LAN systems at work, when really they should have been looking at Excel 2003, a video editor, Photoshop, something like that. But it ran really nicely with around 30 to 40 FPS with mixed settings using low, medium and high. With completely lower settings you could probably make it more competitive in terms of the higher frame rate, but I'm going to imagine someone out there was running this while they were loading an intense stock spreadsheet or something, and maybe their CPU couldn't push much more than 40 FPS. Who knows? Who knows what these cards were used for? Still, it was just about playable, looked alright, and it was smooth enough to be somewhat competitive. Overall then, the benchmarks. Well, performance is what I'd say solid and playable in virtually everything up to around 2005-ish, with 90s titles shining through particularly, as they looked amazing, and those later titles running about half as well as the Matrox Parhelia, which makes sense because this is half the card. So what do you get? Well, you get entry-level to mid-range performance with incredible visual fidelity. As I said earlier, think original Xbox-style gaming with nicer visuals, which is saying something because the original Xbox looks pretty damn good, and this isn't even what this card was meant for. I mean, yes, I did get carried away with the benchmarks, but that's because, for those of you that may want a P650 or P750 Millenium card, you don't know what performance you're going to be getting because there isn't any information out there. If I get around to it, I will try and link some of the raw footage of the games running because I did record them at 60 FPS and let you appreciate just how smooth they look even when the frame rate drops. Still, for those 3 people angry in the comments saying, "But Mr. Budget Builds, Windows Vista kills performance and I hate going outside and sunlight scares me," I did do some testing with Windows XP and I'll throw up some of those results right now. Really, there was no performance difference between Vista or XP. When it came to any of the benchmarks, there were slight differences, but nothing you could actually see or feel in gameplay. So if you like getting angry at graphs, this segment is for you, as sometimes Vista was better, other times XP was better, but generally they ran about the same. The same also goes for enabling the enhancements, where you could see a couple of FPS difference if that. I can only assume that the drivers are so ludicrously well optimized and being based off a flagship card designed entirely around these features, it makes little to no performance hit. So no issues here when it comes to either the operating system or using the fancy effects, because there is no reason to ever turn these off. Any game you run, you get to run with enhancements, which is a nice feature to see on a card that was never designed for gaming. However, back to the real world of actual Matrox Millenium use cases, and what are there? Well, there is certainly the fact that these cards have dual monitor support, which isn't a real surprise given that is what Matrox has stood for, well, years, even up to the point of these things releasing, and there are no exceptions here. I was running with the most common use case, which is a digital display. My laptop screen over on the left is being ran by the Matrox card, and I've also got a native VGA output to a CRT. Now, I am making things a little bit more complex by throwing a capture card into the mix, but even then, no issues here at all. Dual display works without a hitch, and this is on 20-year-old hardware. Yes, we're running Vista, but the same support all goes back to Windows 2000, I believe, so you can run any operating system and get smooth dual monitor support. But why? Why would you have dual screens? Well, the main reason is productivity. Reviewers praise the cards for their support of it, and in industry, a lot of these made their way into video editing. So I loaded up a Budget Builds video, the full edited version here, running on this PC with the Matrox card, and you know what was brilliant to see? It was scaling native 1080p video across 2 displays. One, my editing preview window, and then a full resolution version being displayed over on the CRT, which I wasn't expecting to work, yet alone work as smooth as it did. I mean, this is actually a nicer editing setup than my laptop that I'm, recording this into right now. I mean, don't be wrong, the PC itself isn't really equipped to deal with full HD video with multiple layers and lots of keyframes going on, but then again, it's displaying it. And I mean, even modern day use cases are well within the realms of feasibility on these old Matrox cards. Sometimes when I've done similar tests with Nvidia or ATI cards, they do struggle with dealing with multiple hardware accelerated applications on multiple monitors, but I could load up games while I was editing, and it handles it fine, which is impressive given the age of the hardware and the level of complexity of these tasks. Yes, we take it for granted today. I could plug my laptop into anything and use it as a second display and run a game at the same time. But we're talking about doing that on 20-year-old hardware. And it's a feat that makes you understand how these very literally became the success they were. Because the gaming performance isn't what they were for. It was this use case where you could do whatever you wanted and it was going to be stable and it was going to work. I don't really know what else to test that could be classed as productivity. I mean, you could say 3D modeling, but then trying to find older 3D modeling software that even I could understand is going to be a bit of a pain. So I ran Photoshop across 2 displays and messed around with it for a bit, and it worked fine. That appears to be the beauty of these cards. In an era of AGP troubleshooting and PCIe teething problems, we ran into no issues at all. I mean, we can ignore the dying core of the G750, but that's age, not so much the card itself. These cards just work, and when it comes to productivity, that is a huge deal. From here though, there isn't a huge deal left to say. I mean, I've touched on virtually everything. For those of you about to leave comments about the phenomenal 2D quality of your Matrox card back in the 90s, well, they still have that here. I ran Fallout 2 and it looked brilliant on the LCD and also on the CRT. You can't fault these cards for their output. They probably are the peak of what analog output was before it, became mainstream. And the good enough approach, well, that's what it became. I mean, I don't really think there's too much degradation on later cards and their VGA output, but there just seems to be something just a little bit nicer here. Maybe it's placebo, maybe it's the marketing about all image quality and all that, but something just looked better. So there we have it, the Matrox Millenium Reboot. And these cards have gone forgotten for years, and my thoughts, well, they don't deserve to go forgotten. The way I see it is that these cards are the start of what Matrox what they are today, with a focus on the professional market, using surprisingly decent gaming hardware at their base to offer good acceleration and support. So it's not so different from what they're doing today with their AMD range of chips, their short-lived Nvidia ones, and their new Intel-based Luma range, which is just taking a chip, making it perform brilliantly with stability and features so good that, even a borderline dead GPU core can somehow boot Windows and function without crashing. I've not seen that before. From Nvidia trickery through to time forgetting its existence, I really think over in the retro market, these things are due a bit of a resurgence, as a brilliant way to experience 90s titles, and not a half bad one for the 2000s ones either. This one goes out to, as the reviewers call it, all of the gamers with a job, so to speak. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed watching this rather complex deep dive into a card that very few people know existed. It's taken a while to make this video. I mean, I'm looking down at the script now and this is a very long script. Anyway, thank you very much for watching and good night.
So, one of the main issues I've ran into with the Matrox Millenium series, at least the Reboot series, is that there's a dog coming, isn't there? Thank you, Flo. We'll try that again.